Hey, friends, welcome back to Notes to My Nervous System. This is a podcast about understanding your nervous system so you can move through hard moments with a little more calm and a lot less self blame. I'm Erin, a mom, a therapist, and creator of the Mind Circuit app. It's a simple nervous system tool for moments when your body needs support before your brain can catch up. Hey, friends, thank you for joining Notes to My Nervous System. Anybody who knows me knows I like to just jump on in. So today we're welcoming Dr. Sharon Martin. She's a trauma therapist specializing in supporting adult children of dysfunctional families. She's the author of Cutting Ties with Your Parents, the Better Boundaries Workbook, and the CBT, which is Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Workbook for Perfectionism, which I probably should check out personally. Today, we're talking all about boundaries. So, thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to dig right in and see what we uncover about boundaries. Hopefully, some great insights and helpful tips for everyone listening.
Oh, I hope so. I'm sure. I'm not even worried about that. What do you feel comes up when you start talking about boundaries? What is making a person feel that defensiveness, putting up their guard, their nervous system starts to kind of react like like boundaries is a bad word or something.
I think at this point, most people understand the importance of boundaries, and we're usually on the same page that we need some boundaries in our life. As you're saying, I think when we really get into the idea of how do you set boundaries, it
Mm-hmm.
starts to get scary. I think there's a couple of different reasons for that. Is one, it's often that people have had a bad experience trying to set boundaries in the past. So they've tried and the boundary hasn't worked. So they haven't gotten the need met that they were trying to have met with this boundary. So it's ineffective, but also they often get a negative reaction from the other person. So that could be anger or pushback, or it could even be that somebody simply ignores the boundary. They just, say, either flat out
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm not going to do that, or I don't care about that. Or sometimes people make promises and say, oh, yes, I'll make that change, or I'll do that. I understand. And then they don't follow through. So all of
Mm-hmm.
that is very off-putting, I think, to the idea when people say, "Oh, it's not going to work," or "It's too hard. I don't want to deal with people's anger or upset about it." So that's one piece of it is that we've had those negative or difficult experiences with it. But then I think the other thing is sometimes we really get in our own head about it and we start imagining worst case scenarios, all the things
Okay.
that could go wrong, so perhaps maybe you actually haven't even tried to set that many boundaries, but you're just imagining that it's not going to work. And I always tell people that boundaries are a skill that we need to learn how to set, just like cooking or driving a car. You're not just going to know how to do things if nobody has modeled that for you or taught it to you. So a lot
Mhm.
of us are going through life without the skills that we need to be able to set the boundary effectively. And once you learn some of that, you have more confidence and you're going to be able to relax into it. If we start to have some success, it becomes less scary. Our nervous system can relax. It can say, oh, okay, I
Mhm.
don't need to be on guard all of the time. I don't need to be afraid of the reaction or feeling
Right.
guilty about that. That's the place where we want to get to, of course, is a place where we can both feel confident and have, again, some sense of safety, emotional safety in the experience of setting the boundary.
It always surprises me how little we as individuals know about our brain, our body, our nervous system. It's like we never read our own manual. And then all of a sudden, we're having to interact and be in relationship with others.
Yeah, well, I didn't get a manual. I don't know if you did. And so
I'm still
that
waiting on the manual from my
that
children.
that would have been really helpful, but as we all know, even when we get new appliances or things, we often don't read the manual even when we get one.
That is
So,
very, very true.
it's very much a learn as you go process, I
Mhm.
think, and so much of it is experimenting and trying new things, seeing what's going to work, and even realizing that what might work with one person in one
Mhm.
relationship might not be that effective with somebody else. But again, as we're even talking about this idea of being able to experiment with setting boundaries in relationship, we still need a foundational amount of safety in the relationship, because setting a boundary is necessary, but it's also vulnerable, because it's really just a form of us asking for something. It's saying, "This
Mhm.
is what I need." And that is a vulnerable thing to do, because, as I was saying, there's always a chance that somebody is going to reject that, ignore that, somehow let you know that it's not important or they don't care about you. So, of course, that's risky for us to do. So, if we think about trying to do this in like incremental stages, it's going to
Mhm.
feel safer for us. And so you can also think about that in terms of what relationships are maybe the most functional or feel the safest for you, and
Mhm.
you want to start practicing boundaries in those relationships instead of in the most conflicted relationships, the most difficult relationships. Like, don't start there, because that's going to be the hardest place, right?
Right.
Think about, a small boundary rather than a really big one. Start small, start with safe people, and then work your way up to the ones that are going to be more challenging. I think sometimes it just feels like there's a lot of urgency about a really difficult relationship or a boundary that feels like, oh, it's really big and it's really important. That may be
Mhm.
true, unless it's like a real safety issue. If it's a safety issue, then you need to deal with it
Of
immediately, right? You
course,
can't
but
you can't ignore that. But a lot of the other things are things that we can work up to.
what's an example of, like, practicing having a safe small boundary with someone who you have a safe relationship with? Say, a teenager with a family member.
A teenager might not be the safest.
Well, the
And
teen being safe with their parents.
yes, ideally, for sure. And I think that is what we want to think about is who are the people that we're the closest to, that we
Mhm.
already know care about us, are invested in our well-being, and want us to get our needs met. So hopefully that's your family members, but again, not always. And with some people you can actually be as overt as saying to them, I'm working on setting more clear boundaries, or, you can actually tell them that this is something that you're working on. And that kind of gives them a little bit of insight into, hey, this is going to be a new dynamic in our relationship. You might notice me asking for some particular things or using some different language or a different approach. Sometimes that just helps them ease into the transition as well. Because if it's a relationship where you haven't been setting many boundaries, the other person is also going to need time to adjust to that, because it's a shift in that relationship. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that if you're making a big change by starting to set boundaries, other people may just be caught off guard by that and simply
Mhm.
need either some information about what's going on and why you're doing this, or more time to adjust to it. Like, you can think about a boundary as an expectation,
Mhm.
a limit that you are going to ask for in this relationship. So, I mean, it could be that you ask your family to put their dishes in the dishwasher instead of just leaving them in the sink. So
Mhm.
that might be a fairly low stakes kind of request that you're going to make. That's not to say, I mean, some people might be upset with that if they're used to you coming along and doing all the dishes for them, and now you're asking them to do something different.
Mhm.
But again, it's probably not a deal breaker. It's not going to be such a big issue in a relationship that it's going to be something that people are going to end a relationship over, right? Some boundaries are much bigger asks that we're having, or, again, keep the TV volume down after 10 o'clock when I've gone to bed, or, asking a friend, please don't text me, before
Mhm.
6 a.m. Or again, something that most of
Right.
us would say, yeah, these are pretty, reasonable things to ask, pretty, low stakes kind of boundaries. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about in terms of like, where do you start with something?
No, I think those are great examples, and I think it will help anybody listening to understand how much they are already in their lives setting healthy boundaries so that hopefully it doesn't feel like such a big step for them. Maybe a little help with a little bit of feeling a little bit of the fear or the worry. When you speak about boundaries, I sometimes will run into people feeling like they're about to be pushed away or given an ultimatum. Do you have suggestions or tools or tips to help people, I don't know, maybe diffuse the wording or the conversation? I don't know why boundaries have become so triggering sometimes as a word.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about them that people think that a boundary is like I'm laying down the law and I'm telling you
Mhm,
this is the way it has to be, and like there's no negotiation or there's no compromise involved. And in most situations, there is. It's a very relational process. I always tell people that there are going to be a few non-negotiable boundaries that we all have, just deal breakers. These are things that I cannot compromise on. And again,
mhm,
these are generally safety issues that people have. And usually I tell people, really probably 3 to 5 is about where you want to be with this. Because if you start piling in 10, 20 things into your
oh,
list
wow.
of deal breakers, it's going to be very difficult for you to have relationships with people. Right? That's where you're
Absolutely.
pushing people away. You're saying so many things are just unacceptable and I can't live with that or I can't deal with that. Reality is there's usually a lot more in the gray area.
Mhm,
Again, where, these are presumably people that you care about and who care about you. And so we want to work together to create
mhm,
boundaries that work for everybody so that I feel like I'm getting my needs met, but also my partner does or my kids do.
mhm,
Again, because that's
mhm,
how our relationships are going to work and be satisfying for all of us. So back to your question, there are some things that we can actually say, I think, to move this along in that direction. And I mentioned some of this in my book as well, where I would say something like, this is important to me, or it would mean a lot to me if you would turn down the TV at 10 o'clock.
mhm,
Instead of me saying, kids, TV goes off at 10 o'clock, right? I mean, certainly tone of voice, the choice of words. And there are certain things that we can do to soften the language, while
mhm,
also letting people know that it's important to us. And again, I think there's the relational component that comes into play rather
mhm,
than it's not just me saying, this is what I need or this is what you must do, but I'm making a request of you. And again, this could also then lead into if they say, oh, we really like staying up late and watching these, sports or whatever, and it's important, that's
mhm,
important to us. And we say, then, that becomes the part where we say, okay, like, how can we figure this out so that you can
right.
enjoy your program in the evening, or, maybe they're having friends over and that's important for them and where they're at in their life. I want to go to bed and get a good night's sleep, and that's important to me. There's probably multiple ways that we can solve this problem where we can both get at least most of our needs met. It might not be a
Mhm,
perfect solution, but again, this is not a boundary that has to be so hard and fast that it has to be my way. Again,
mhm,
it's I'm trying to figure out how can I get a good night's sleep. And one
right.
way is me asking you to turn down the TV, but there might be other things, right? I mean,
Do you
when
think breaking it down like that, though, saying that this is about me wanting to get a good night's sleep, giving some of that context instead of it's just my way, your way type thing, is that helpful or does that lead to like over explaining or over justifying? I'm
Yeah.
always worried about where that line is.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right with that because there is a line and it really depends on the relationship, the context for the boundary. Again, ideally, this would be a situation where me explaining to you what I'm trying to accomplish here, or why I'm setting this boundary, that will matter to you and that will be information that helps you work with me to figure this out. So again, if that
Mhm,
is the context for this boundary in this relationship that we're having, then I think that's going to be useful. oftentimes people do have relationships in their life with some people who, and again, if you're listening to this, you probably will, the names will come to your mind immediately. The
Mhm.
people who, really push back a lot about boundaries. They don't seem to
Mhm.
respect you and your needs, or they frankly sometimes don't care that much about your needs. And they're more people who are interested in themselves and their own needs. Again, you kind of know who the more difficult relationships or difficult people are in your life. And if you've got some of those, then you may need to use the other approach, which is, and I think this is where people are often used to talking about boundaries more in this context, where it feels like it's more of, it's less of a joint venture, right? It's more of this
Right.
unilateral, I'm setting the boundary. In those situations, like you were saying, it can work against you to explain why you're setting the boundary, because these kinds of situations, people will use the explanation to then try to, like, use that against you,
Mhm.
convince you that you don't need this boundary or your need is not important here. And again, it just becomes a way
Mhm.
for them to force their will on you. So that's really something to keep in mind and remember kind of who it is that you're working with here to determine what the best approach is. And again, if you're not sure and you try to use this sort of what I call the sort of more relational approach and explaining things to
Mhm.
people, and you realize, hey, this is not helpful, then I I tried that, it didn't work. I know now with this person what I need to do is just be more direct, give less options, give less explanations, and say, "Hey, this is what I need from you. Is that something that you're able to do or you're willing to do?" Because that's the other part that sometimes people miss with boundaries is they get so focused on the boundary being about me asking you to do something or to change
Mhm.
something, that they forget that the boundary can also work by you making a change yourself. What I mean by that is in a lot of situations you can change your own behavior to get your need met.
Like.
Not always. Okay, so let's say like we were using the example of I'm going to ask my friend, "Don't text me early in the morning."
Mhm.
So again, I think that's a fine boundary. It's a reasonable thing to ask of your friend, but I have no control over whether she is going to do that or not. All I can do
Right.
is make the request. And again, either she may say, "Oh yes," but then she keeps doing it, or she might just not, say she can't help it and she's going to keep doing it. So
Mhm.
then I have to say, "Okay, well, what can I do in this situation? What are my options?" So it's fairly easy with your phone, right? You can put it on
Right.
do not disturb, or you can do some settings. I'm not real super technical, but I'm pretty sure you got some options on there that, right? Or, just keep the thing off or in the other room or,
Mhm.
something like that where I have created the same boundary without needing the other person to change their behavior. I have changed
Mhm.
my behavior to take care of that situation. And I think this is again where people kind of get hung up with it because they say, well, I shouldn't have to do that. The other
I
person
was about to
should
say, I have.
they should respect my boundary. I just asked for a reasonable thing, and that's all well and good. But the bottom line is, I can't control what other people do. I can only control what I do.
So you
And
have to decide if you really want this boundary met and that other person, for whatever reason, can't remember, can't follow through.
yeah,
How do you make sure your boundary's still kept?
yeah.
And so you can do it for yourself and you don't feel that's like disrespecting yourself for the boundary.
What we're really doing is we're thinking about, I have a certain need in this situation. How can I get this need met? Now,
Mm.
none of this is perfect in real life, right?
We're
Because,
human, we're
right,
messy.
none of it is, it's not always going to be exactly the way that you want it to go, I guess is what I
Mhm.
mean. So again, like if we go back to this example of, let's just say, I'm sick and tired of being the only one who washes the dishes or puts the dishes in the dishwasher, and I've asked the family to put the dishes in the dishwasher and they're still just leaving them in the sink. Then I have to say, okay, well, what are my options here? I
Mhm.
can't force people to put the dishes in the dishwasher as much as I wish that I could or think that they should. Right?
There are so many people out there right
Yeah.
now shaking their heads like, yep.
Exactly. And so I have to then say, okay, well, what can I do? What is the unmet need that I have in this situation? I could have an option of, well, I can just leave them in the sink. I don't have to take responsibility. And again,
True.
that may feel like, well, that's a lousy option. It's not what I want, right? Because I don't want the dishes piling up. I mean, that's
Right.
unpleasant, and I'm going to be unhappy about that. But that is an option. It's a valid
Hmm.
option, right? If my issue is I don't want to be washing all the dishes. So sometimes we have to choose, something that's going to be the less ideal choice. But again, I mean, what is the alternative? Is you can keep on doing it.
And keep arguing, and then it becomes like an ego thing.
Yeah, who's going to give in? Who's going to
Yeah,
give
who's gonna
in,
give in
right?
first? Who's gonna
Uh-huh.
break first? And then it just feels like the boundary now has kind of like gone out the window because it's no longer that relational conversation like you originally said.
Yeah,
Now it's just who's gonna get their way. And that
right.
doesn't feel very much like a boundary to me.
No, and that's where you have people just digging in their heels and saying it has to be this way. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you can also think about, okay, this is now become a family problem that there's dishes all over the kitchen, right? And nobody's doing the
Mhm.
dirty dishes. And hopefully, we as a family could also work together to come up with some solutions, right? The solution, like for me, it's not an acceptable solution for that to be all on me, that I'm the only one responsible for doing the dishes, right? So
Mhm.
maybe instead of everybody putting, washing their own dish or putting it in the dishwasher, maybe the family would like to come up with a different solution. Maybe
Oh.
we're going to assign everybody one day to do all of the dishes. Or again, there's
Mhm.
probably other creative solutions that people can come up with. It doesn't necessarily have to be this one way. The important thing is we figure out something that is going to work for us to get all the dishes washed.
So the approach of coming to the person or the people involved and saying what your need is, and this is what you're working on as a boundary, and having their input.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
like
And
that approach. That gives more like buy-in for the other person or people involved with it, and it doesn't feel as much as being vulnerable, asking for something, worried they're going to say no, because you're actually having them help you come up with some of those solutions.
yeah, and I think, I mean, you're going to get the buy-in when people feel invested in, or feel like they have a voice in
Mm.
the decisions that are being made. They're more likely to follow through on that rather than somebody just telling them what to do. Again, whether that's your child or your spouse. I mean, and I
Mhm.
think it's just very much, it's more respectful to the people in your life also to say, can you help me figure out how to solve this problem?
No, I love that. That's beautiful. That's such a different like perspective. That shift in I'm not sitting you down having this very difficult conversation about my boundary flips to let's come up with some things together as either a partnership, a family. What are things that we can do because this is a need and I need support and help and brainstorming to figure out how to get that need met. And
Because that's
that feels safer to me, at least my nervous system would
Yeah, and
react
I
that
and I
way.
think it's going to be more effective too. Again, with most
Mhm.
people, I mean, again, there are going to probably be some
Yeah.
people in your life who you're not going to be able to use that approach with, but with many people you can. And and it is going to be something that everybody is going to say, "Oh, wow. I didn't realize mom was so frustrated or exhausted from doing all of the dishes." And again,
Mhm.
hopefully they care about that, right? They love you. They want you
Right.
to, be happy and healthy and so forth. Nobody wants to do the dishes, but we can all see that we need some kind of plan to get it done. So hopefully people are going to work together to come up with something. And we're talking about a family situation, but you can apply the same thing to an office or other relationships that you have in your life as well.
Do you find it's more difficult within an office setting to get the time to sit down and have that conversation? Because at least with the family unit in my mind,
Yeah.
if we're stuck in the car carpooling or sitting down for dinner or something, there's opportunities, right?
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I mean, and I think it depends on where you fall in the hierarchy
Oh,
at your
that's true.
place of work as well. I mean, if you're at the top and you're the one who can set the staff meeting agenda or something like that, well, then you're going to have a lot more control and power in this situation to try to do something like this. If you're at the bottom, and or again, just depending on the context, if you work at a
Right.
place where there's, three shifts of staff and you never are all in the same place at the same time, and then you're sort of resorting to email or text or
Mm.
something, it may not be as effective. Or you may just feel like, I don't know these people. There isn't really a relational context. So I'm asking, the people at the office to wash their coffee cups. And, it's a little bit harder because they're not actually, I don't know you or care about you in the
Right.
same way that
Right.
you would expect your family to. But again, I think in many situations you can apply the same principles and have some success with that if you can at least get that process going. And again, that might be if you're sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy, maybe there's your manager or somebody above you that you can, at least to broach the subject with, try to get a little buy-in there so that again, somebody else with a little bit more leverage could bring it up or facilitate some of that as well.
That brings up an interesting point and a conversation that I know a lot of people will have, especially when they're starting a new job and they're brand new.
Mhm.
And so they're trying to have their coworkers, their boss like them, know that they're dependable. How do you help an individual be able to say no to the boss when they're asking you for the third time that week to stay late or come in early? I remember when I was brand new working in the school system back in the day or
Mhm.
at the behavioral hospital, and the newbie always gets asked first because they're more likely to say yes.
It's a great question, Erin, because it's a tricky one because you're
Mhm.
right. I mean, there is this sense of I need to prove myself, I want to be liked, I want to fit in. And there's some validity to all of that. At the same time, I think you're going to run into a lot of problems if you don't set some boundaries early on because
Mm.
you're really setting a precedent then of people expecting you to overwork, to do too much, to
Mhm.
do things. I mean, it could even be, you're asked to do things, something that you think is unethical or unsafe, things like that. And so, it becomes harder to put the boundaries up later than it
If
does
you
to
say,
start.
yeah.
Yeah, right. So, right, if you're staying late 3 nights a week from the beginning and then, 3 months from now, you're saying, oh, this is unsustainable. I really need to set some boundaries. Now people are expecting you to do it. It has become the norm that Erin is the one who will stay late or she will do, X, Y, and Z for us. So you've kind of gotten yourself into a difficult situation that can be hard to get yourself out of, rather than I think it's probably easier to start at the beginning. And again, I think the other thing you want to think about here is many of these situations don't have to be all or nothing. So, in a situation where you're being asked to work late or cover somebody else's shift or something along these lines,
Mhm.
your answer doesn't need to be yes or no every single time. It could be, oh, I could stay late for 30 minutes, or
Mhm.
I could, do a little bit of this extra project. I mean, so again, there's still some limit that you're setting, but you're also considering your own needs and what's going to work for you in your life and making sure that you're not feeling like you're being taken advantage of or doing something that is not going to align with your values or who you are as a person or those types of things. Again, think about where there's some compromise within the
Mhm.
boundary, and maybe, the answer isn't necessarily yes or no every single time, but maybe it actually is okay for me to work late occasionally. And so I can say yes once in a while, but it's not going to work for me to stay late every single day. I want to make sure that I'm letting people know where my limits are.
So thinking about that ahead of time, about the yes but or the yes and, so that you're creating a healthier narrative of where your line is.
Yeah, the
Am I
other thing
getting that?
yeah, the other thing that that really reminded me of is there's often a real sense of urgency that I have to give an answer immediately. And I think this is true in so many situations, not just this particular scenario, but again, your boss is
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
hey, right, it's 4 o'clock. Hey, could you stay late tonight? And you feel like, oh, I better answer right away. The vast
Mhm.
majority of times you can pause and say, you know what? Let me think about that. Or I need to, check with my family or check my calendar and take a little bit of space, and just let that person know I'll let you know in a half an hour, or I'll let you know later, that you're taking time to actually reflect on, is this going to work for me? Is this possible? What are the pros and cons on this, right? So you're really being able to think it through rather than in the moment. Oftentimes, our automatic is, I better say yes. Because again, that's that nervous system, right? Spiking up and
Right?
saying, oh, this feels scary. I don't want my boss mad at
Uh-huh.
me, or I don't want people upset with me. So we just go right to the yes because that's going to feel like the safest option. It's going to calm things down. And then later we regret it. And
And then
we're
you get
unhappy.
all these
Yeah,
quiet quitting things I've heard
yes,
about or
yeah, we're upset with ourselves. We get burned down the road. That would be, I think, also a really helpful thing for people to remember is, you don't have to respond immediately. You get a text message, or an email. You thought, oh, I better respond right away before I forget. And people expecting me to answer right away. You really can take a little bit of time, figure it out, and then respond. And again, that is itself a form of a boundary that you're right without explicitly saying, but you're letting people know what to expect from you, that I don't necessarily respond to my text messages immediately. And then people will start to know, oh, Sharon
that's
doesn't
a
doesn't
really
doesn't respond right away. So
that's a
I'll
good boundary right there though, because it
Mhm.
automatically builds in that idea that I don't have to respond. I've already told this person I don't respond immediately because I don't know if you've ran into this, but I will have younger clients who, if they don't get the response right away immediately, they take that as rejection when it may not be that whatsoever.
Yeah. And again, especially if you know that somebody is a little bit more anxious, or if you have been responding immediately and this is going to be a change that you're making, it can be really helpful for you to let people know, hey, this is something different that I'm doing. I'm not going to be responding immediately. That's nothing personal. This isn't because
Right.
I don't care, or again, so you're setting the expectation. Usually, and again, like you'll see a lot of people do this with a voicemail message or an autoresponder on email where they're letting
Mhm.
people know, I usually respond within 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever it is. And again, that helps people know what to expect from you. And that helps relationships run more smoothly. I can relax knowing that I should hear back from Erin within 48 hours rather than me assuming all these terrible things. Erin doesn't like me anymore. She doesn't care about me, or she didn't get my message, or.
Mhm.
So now I know that this is how she operates. This is kind of her procedure. Ah, okay. I can
It
relax.
creates that safety then right there for both of you. I like that so much.
Exactly. And that's really what is so wonderful about boundaries in relationships is we have clear expectations. We know what we've
Mhm.
agreed upon in this relationship. And then that lets us feel at ease. We have the safety there.
Is there a way when someone's starting either a new job, a new friendship, whatever new relationship it is, some things to keep in mind to help themselves to remember to take the pause, remember what are some of the boundaries, not going through that what if off case, worst case scenarios sometimes we all do. but more of a like healthier approach to like practice for yourself, especially if you're not used to having good boundaries.
Mhm. Well, I think it might be helpful for people to think about what boundaries they need in the new situation. And sometimes that's reflecting on previous experiences. That all work situations are the same or all friendships are the same, but oftentimes we can think about a friendship that didn't go so well or a
Mm.
work situation that didn't go so well and think, well, what boundaries would have been helpful in that situation? What are the boundaries that might have supported me in being more satisfied or to feel more respected, get more of my needs met here? And so that might be helpful information going into a new situation to say, okay, I better make sure that I'm communicating that
Mm.
to the person that I'm, having this relationship with or interacting with here.
And what do you do with individuals who communication isn't their strong suit?
Communication is important in all of our relationships. And so
Mhm.
I think if you're having some communication issues, we want to first think about, okay, am I being clear in my communication? Is there something that I need to adjust about my approach, the way that I'm
So
communicating?
self-reflection, not just looking at the other person, starting with you first.
Yeah,
Okay.
because again, if there's something that I can change, that's where I'm gonna
It's
be the most
easiest.
effective, right? Again, sometimes we don't wanna be we have to change our approach, but it's where I have control of things, and so that's the in some ways, it's the best approach is to say, "Okay." And then, yes, I wanna also think about, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, where
Mm,
I'm saying it. Again, things like face to face better, is telephone
mhm.
better. I mean, sometimes text message we know is notoriously difficult because we miss, certain facial
Yes.
cues or nonverbal cues and tone of voice and things like that. So again, you might think about, well, is part of this because we're doing so much of this by text or by email, and would it be better if us we actually picked up the phone or got together and talked about things? And then, of course, we can think about, is there something going on the other person's side of this relationship? Is there
Mhm.
something about, what's going on in their life or their personality or some challenges that they have that is making communication difficult for them? This might not be anything that you can do anything about, but it might just be information that helps you be more understanding or more compassionate, take more time with this person, or again, change your approach because you recognize that there are some barriers there or just some challenges that are going to make communication with them more difficult. It's those can be difficult situations and frustrating situations, of course, when like I said, I mean, obviously communication is such a fundamental piece of
It is,
of
but
all relationships, and I
so
suppose
many of
yeah.
us, though, don't have some of those basic skills or even the understanding of where to start with that. The whole idea of asking yourself what your need is, and am I
Mhm.
communicating that in a way where the other person can understand it and understand the how of how they can show up for me.
Yeah, I think we're so busy these days and we're so often multitasking that I think sometimes the problem is just that we aren't giving each other our full attention or we're not carving out space that's really
Mm,
specifically for us to communicate. Because sometimes the problem is really just as simple as making sure the other person is paying attention. Like, is this a good time for us to have this conversation? It could be they're on their phone or maybe they're preoccupied. Kids are running around,
mm,
in the background. Basic things like this that can really interrupt the communication. But we feel so much pressure to deal with it right away, or feel like there's no good time for us to have it, or we don't, maybe as a couple, we don't really have any
mm,
time just to ourselves. And so, we're working with less than ideal situations. And again, sometimes that's just going to be the reality that we have to work with what we have. But I think even within that, we can probably make some adjustments so that, we're both saying, okay, this is an important thing. We should talk about well, let's give it our attention. Even thinking about when's a good time for us to try to do this. Maybe it's not in this moment. I think again, so often you come home from work and something's on your mind and you start getting into it and, thinking like, oh, we need to solve this problem or deal with it right away. And again, just
Mhm.
like I was saying earlier, so often things really can wait a little bit until we have a better situation to figure it out.
So what I'm picking up, and let me know if I'm wrong, but when you feel that urgency, that might be a good time to actually ask yourself if you need a pause instead.
I love that because I think usually you do need a pause.
Oh, I know
And
I am. I'm
right?
I'm like, let's go, let's go. I'm originally from Chicago. I interrupt. I have ADHD. I'm dyslexic. So if I can say it correctly, I want to get it out quick. So a pause, though, when you're feeling that urgency might just be a really nice kind of like a indicator of, oof, maybe I do need to do something different, or write it down or something if you're scared you're
Yes,
gonna
yes.
forget.
Love that
Old
idea.
school.
Nope, it's a great one. And again, if old school is like our us with our paper and pen, but you can do it new school
Right
on
now.
your phone, make a note on there.
Mhm.
Or voice recording, something, right? So you don't forget it. But
I
I
like
think
the voice recording because then you can hear yourself
yeah.
and maybe catch where there might be some difficulty with the communication with the way you are going to say
Mm.
it.
Yep, yep, that's a nice tool right there. Eh, but, I might also ask, is this really urgent? Do I really need to talk about it right now? Do I really need to set a boundary about this right now? Or is it something that can wait? And
Mhm.
like I keep saying, most of the time it can wait, and that waiting also gives you time to think about what is the what that I need? What is the best approach? And it can also be time to practice. Just like you were saying, like we could use the voice recording. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to practice in front of the mirror, or I'm going to practice writing down a script, or I'm going to run this by a trusted friend first. Those are all really great ways for us to collect our thoughts, think about our options, be more thoughtful about the language that we're going to use and how we're going to approach this with people. Because I think, again, when you do that and you take a little bit more time with it, you're going to have more success because it's going to land probably in a way that's more effective and feels better to the other person rather than spur of the moment. I'm sort of amped up, I'm feeling urgent
Mhm.
about this, and then it can kind of come out sideways a lot of the time, and then that's where we're like too harsh with it, or, we're blaming the other person or making a demand, something along those lines, which isn't the approach that we intended.
Oh, but I like your point about that because then it forces you to recognize I'm having this conversation or saying this because ultimately this is my goal.
Yeah.
So it's not my way or the highway. It's how do we get to this goal? And so that makes it feel a little easier then because there's so many different ways to approach things.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. This has been a fun conversation. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good. Good.
I love boundary conversations. I think it's just important for people to understand that there's so much more to it
Yep.
and that it's not one way or the other way. It's not an ultimatum. And there seems to
Nope.
be that confusion for whatever reason.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think boundaries have gotten a bad rap in a lot of ways, that people feel like it's like this line I draw in the sand and, this is the
Mhm,
way it is. As we've been talking about, there's often, a conversation, there's
mhm.
negotiation, there's compromise, there's considering everybody's needs so that we can work together, because that really is what relationships are about. And that's ultimately what boundaries are about, is they are
Mhm.
going to help us have relationships that work. And that's a great goal for all of us, is recognizing that a boundary is going to help your relationship run more smoothly when we have expectations that we all understand, we all agree upon, and we're all getting at least, most of our needs met most of the time.
No, I love that. I think that's a good place to wrap that up because those are really important nuggets. But before I lose my time with you. I always like to kind of put my guests on the spot and ask a little question.
Mm,
Um, if you could give your younger self some advice, words of wisdom, a phrase, a poem, a statement, permission, what
mhm.
do you think would have been beneficial? Then our listeners then can pick up on that and maybe take that to heart for themselves.
Oh boy.
I know I put people on the spot. I think it's the therapist side of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I think about myself growing up, gosh, I think so much of the time I really just I wanted to be invisible. If you could have said, "Oh, you could have one superpower when you were a child," it would
Mhm.
probably be the invisibility cloak. So I didn't want anybody to see me or hear me. I just wanted, blend into the background and not have that attention on me. And I think that really comes from just a, sort of a sense of not being good enough, not feeling like I fit in anywhere, um,
Mhm.
not feeling confident. And so I'd love to be able to tell myself that you are as good as everybody else. You do have something worthwhile
Mhm.
and that you're going to find your place and you're going to find your way. And, it's going to take a little while, but you're going to get there and it's gonna be okay. Something along those lines that I think for, so many kids do feel that way. I know I
Oh,
certainly wasn't the only one, but, you feel awkward and you don't fit
oh,
in
absolutely.
you don't have to be the popular person or the best at everything. And I think I spent so much time sort of trying to prove myself and feel like, okay, yeah, I was, good enough or as good as other people. And
That good enough comes up so much,
oh
and
yeah.
especially in women.
Mm,
And it's surprising when you're an adult and you look back and you're like, good enough for who? About what? Like,
yeah.
who is
Oh,
even watching?
yeah. Well, and of course, with, adult hindsight, I can look back and also see I had a lot of strengths. I was good at a lot of things. And so it's
Mhm.
also that in certain ways there was truth in, yeah, maybe I didn't, fit in or I wasn't a popular kid or things like that, but it certainly wasn't like, oh, there was nothing good about you or you weren't good at anything. It was also not really realistic also. But anyway, and it's that sense of, okay, you, you don't have to maybe work so hard or prove yourself
Mhm.
so much or yeah, struggle with all of it. And I do wish like I could have told that younger self, okay, you can relax a little bit. Right?
Right? Like,
Yeah.
slow down, pause, take a break.
Yeah. Feeling
That would have
like,
been lovely.
so much pressure all the time. Yeah.
It's so unnecessary. Hopefully, somebody out there listening or watching will take that to heart. We'll pause, we'll slow down and recognize that they have strengths and we're all
Yeah.
good at something. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for thank you for joining us to my nervous system. If this spoke to you, please leave a review. Unless it's negative, keep that to yourself and hit subscribe. If listening stirred anything up in you and you don't want to sit in it, check out my Mind Circuit app. It's made just for moments like this. It's not therapy, it's very short. It's a guided reset to help you wind down, transition, even fall asleep at night. Just a little help, and your thoughts won't slow down. And as you move forward today, remember setting a boundary is not about pushing people away, it's about protecting your own capacity and creating that emotional safety for yourself. Boundaries aren't a sign of conflict, they're a sign of care. And as always, please remember to be kind to your own wiring.